educational practice during the period of enlightenment. Introduction. In this study session, we shall explore the practice of education during the period after the Renaissance. This period is referred to as the Enlightenment period. We shall also examine the educational ideas of philosophers during this period. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to discuss the practice of education during the Enlightenment period and highlight the educational contributions of John Amos Comenius, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The practice of education in Enlightenment period. After the Renaissance, when ancient Greco-Roman ideas were discovered in the West, came the period of enlightenment, which covered the 17th and 18th centuries. It was an age marked by a growing force of national control of educational policies. It also marked an age in which men began to doubt authority and to observe the world for themselves. Enlightenment thinkers were much concerned with reason. Thinkers redirected their energies towards science and the reshaping of society. These thinkers believed that by making men see reason through arguments, society would be changed and would improve human behavior. In the area of educational policy, the state, in addition to the control of education, established state schools at all levels. The children of the poor were offered opportunity for free education, as occurred in France, for example. In Germany, the government built many schools and paid teachers' salaries. In Prussia, there was the national system of elementary education. Government now prescribed in detail the curriculum, textbooks, and teachers' qualifications. Education was not only made secular, but was also seen as an instrument for enhancing economic status. Education was in addition used to prepare students with practical skills for trades and occupations. Thus, state commercial and vocational schools were founded particularly in England and Germany. The period also marked the propounding of various theories on education, some of which were not put into practice. Notable among the educators of the period included John Amos Comenius, 1592 to 1670, John Locke, 1632 to 1704, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712 to 1778. Notable educators during the Enlightenment period. John Amos Comenius. Comenius was born in Moravia, that is, modern Czechoslovakia, in 1592. He rose to become a great theologian, a seasoned teacher, and an educational reformer. He also rose to become the bishop of his nation's church. He advocated a system of universal education that would meet the needs of the rich and the poor boys and girls, nobles and commoners, etc. Comenius was a prolific writer, producing about 170 works, some in Czech and others in Latin. Comenius, as a great educational innovator, wanted education to be extended to everyone. He also advocated a far wider curriculum. He formulated the principles of graded instruction, motivation through interest, and sense perception as the basis of understanding. Education to him must be acquired in publicly provided schools. Physical education was very paramount in his school curricula. He believed that 5 subjects should be taught: the sciences, the arts, languages, morals, and religion. Comenius divided the child's education into 4 major periods. These are: 1. The infancy, which is between the ages of 0 to 6 years. 2. The childhood period, which is between ages 6 to 12 years. 3. The boyhood period, which is between ages 12 to 18 years. And lastly, the youth period, which is between ages 18 to 24 years. The infancy period. The infancy period was to be spent at home with the mother. The purpose of education at this stage was to develop the senses as well as the ability to speak the mother tongue. The state should not be concerned with this. The period of childhood was to be spent in the elementary schools, which should be provided by the state. The curriculum was to consist of elements of literacy and numeracy, and an introduction to some basic school subjects. The medium of instruction was to be the national language. The boyhood stage was to be spent in the secondary grammar school, and this was to be fully provided free by the state. This period should be spent in training the child to understand things and to make relevant judgments. The child should also be introduced to foreign languages at this level. The university or academy was to cater for the 4th stage, meant for children between ages 18 and 24 years. This was also to be state-sponsored and made free, having at least one in every province. The purpose of this education was to develop wisdom and judgment. Students will be able to make objective decisions. In addition to his advocacy of democratization of education, he also gave some guidelines for teaching. As a result of his personal practical experience as a teacher, some of the guidelines included the following. 1. That children are always curious and willing to learn if only they see the need for doing so. 2. Children's learning should be without tears and should be in an atmosphere of love. 3. Children should learn through their senses. Teaching aids should be used to aid learning. 4. Memory work should be minimized. Alternatively, children should be made to understand what is being taught. 5. Instruction must be made to fit the child's level of understanding and stage of development. 6. Materials being taught must be well graded to start from the simple to the complex. 7. Classroom environment should aid learning. It should have pleasant and clean pictures as well as other learning materials. Be well ventilated, well lit, and stimulating for learning. Lastly, the school must be a place of joy and not a place of torture. John Locke, 1632 to 1704. Locke's importance as an educator was firstly in his insistence on the study of the individual pupil and the adjustment of method to suit him. Secondly, was his theory of development of reasoning, which has significance and validity in modern education. To Locke, the function of education is to help the child to learn how to use his reason more and more in the making of decisions. The child should not be given too much prohibition, nor was the care frequently applied. According to Locke, rewards are also as dangerous as punishments, for it means that there is a wrong motive behind the child's obedience. This does not receive the support of modern psychologists. Rules, according to John Locke, must be minimal. Locke considers the content of education as a means of developing in the pupil's virtue, wisdom, breeding, and learning in that order. To him, writing should follow reading. Languages should be learned by conversational and non-grammatical method. The curricula should include arithmetic because it offers the easiest son of abstract reasoning and because of its usefulness. Geography and astronomy are to be presented as mathematical subjects. The child should also be exposed to history, rhetoric, logic, civil law, and biblical history. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712 to 1778, was another notable educator of the period of Enlightenment. Rousseau was an erratic genius who influenced the modern world as did few others. He made a lot of contributions to the educational theory of his period. Born in the Swiss city of Geneva, Rousseau's mother died shortly after his birth, and he was thus brought up by his father. At the age of 10, he was placed in the hands of a tutor, a pastor in the village of Bossey, who taught Rousseau for about 2 years. That was the only formal education he ever received. And soon afterwards, he was given training at a notary's office and then apprenticed to an engraver. Not remaining long in either position, he then left Geneva and lived, according to his confession, as a vagabond for a number of years, traveling through France and Italy. During his trying period of searching for an identity, he laid his hands on various vocations, including servant duties, studying for the priesthood, and a career in music, a secretary, and a tutor. His educational ideas were thus influenced by his own unsettled life. As a result of his early frustration in life, he remained strongly apathetic to most of the societies in which he lived. This lack of settled home and proper education accounted for his interest in education and his revolutionary viewpoints. The turning point in his life came at the age of 25, when, in the course of a serious illness, he set himself to the study of literature and science. At this point, he came in contact with a miscellaneous collection of books, including the Plutarch's Tale of Ancient Greece and Rome, which made a lifelong impression on him. His first success was in 1749, when he won a prize for Best Essay on "Has the Progress of the Arts and Sciences Contributed to the Corruption or the Purification of Morals?" This was an essay competition organized by the Academy of Dijon. 3 years later, in 1752, he presented another essay, "The Discourse upon Inequality," to the Dijon Academy. Although this time he failed to win a prize. The essay received considerable public attention. When the paper was published in 1755, having now found a vocation, Rousseau continued to write whenever he could. Some of his popular books include Social Contracts and Emma, which he published in 1762. Rousseau believed that man is naturally good and that it was the society that corrupts him. His argument was that man is born free, though he is everywhere in chains. He was then going to educate his imaginary pupil, Emma, away from the society. His policy was to train the man and not the citizens. Rousseau has often been called the father of progressiveness. This was because he gave a completely new turn to the method of teaching children. He advocated a child-centered education, a view which had a great deal of influence on modern educationists. Writing on the contributions of Rousseau to the development of the theory and practice of modern education, Robin Barrow, quoted by Akinpelu, 1981, gave 7 major areas of relevance. 1. Rousseau recognized, and quite correctly, that education is more than what takes place in the formal school or classroom. The whole environment of the child is a resource for learning, and there are agencies of learning other than the teacher. Life itself teaches. 2. The curriculum and the teaching method should be governed, to a large extent, by the nature of the child rather than solely by some preconceived plan or blueprints, and certainly not by the dictates of the examination syllabus. 3. The readiness of the child for new items of learning has to be watched, and no new learning task should be presented to him until he demonstrates that he is ready. 4. The child's learning should start from his own experience, but he must take progress towards what is not new within his experience. 5. The child is not a miniature adult, and so should not be treated as such, nor should his education consist mainly of preparation for adult life. 6. Each child is a unique individual and should be studied and understood as such. 7. The teacher should cultivate affection for his pupils, should deeply respect their individual nature, and in general, should be a sympathetic guide and advisor, in addition to his being an expert in an area of knowledge. Other significant educational innovations of Rousseau include: 1. Appreciating the value of discovery, learning and problem solving as educational techniques. 2. Confining the child's early learning to things that are within his own experience and therefore having meaning for him. 3. Realizing the need to understand the child's nature and the way this develops through boyhood and adolescence, and using the knowledge to determine what he should learn at each stage of development. 4. Treating the child as a being in his own right, not just a miniature adult. Rousseau divided the education of a child into 4 periods: infancy, early childhood, late childhood, and adolescence. The infancy, lasting between 0 and 2 years, is the age when the child develops true free activity and the employment of his senses. Formal education should be discouraged at this period. The early childhood period lasts between 2 and 12 years. During this period, the child should be restricted to education provided by his life experience. These are the years during which the child will naturally learn through play and the exercise of his senses. The later childhood lasts between 12 and 15 years. During this period, the curiosity is strongly developed and he is anxious to find out the how and why of things around him. The child at this stage can be given a test of science, but not submitting in depth to make a scientist of him. The child should be allowed to discover at this stage. Youth or adolescence lasts between 15 and 25 years. The real education begins at this period. Here, positive aspects of education should be emphasized. Rousseau recommends the study of biography in preference to reading national history. The child should be exposed to religious instruction, but his acceptance should be based on his own judgments. Study session summary. In this study session, we examine 2 of the notable educators of the period of enlightenment, namely John Amos Comenius, John Locke, and J.J. Rousseau. Comenius, a prolific writer, formulated the principles of graded instruction. The state should provide education. He divided the child's education into 4 periods: infancy, childhood, boyhood, and youth. John Locke was a scholar, philosopher, and writer on many subjects: political figure, philosopher of freedom and toleration, and educational theories. For Locke, the proper education consists of 4 things: virtue, wisdom, breeding, and learning. Jean-Jacques Rousseau posited the idea of child-centered education. He believed that from birth to maturity, the individual moves through stages of growth. Each stage is distinct, unique, and has clearly defined characteristics. Education must conform to these patterns, meeting the needs of each stage and thereby developing the person to his fullest. Rousseau laid the foundations for both pragmatism and progressive education. End of study session 8. Thank you for listening.